After the conclusion of a presentation to a Christian community on the resurrection appearances of Jesus, a member of the congregation replied, "I'm a psychiatrist. I treat people who hear voices and see things that aren't there." His comment was sincere and serious. It was also puzzling. Did this psychiatrist think that these reports found in the Gospels and New Testament literature were mere literary creations? Were they simply symbols of something, but nothing more than that? Or, to use psychiatric jargon, were they nothing but hallucinations? In psychiatry, this word hallucination carries a pejorative meaning. The puzzlement arises because contemporary cognitive neuroscience has researched and described in considerable detail the function of the brain and nervous system in human consciousness, in its many variations. The average human person changes levels of consciousness many times daily. Human beings are capable of experiencing more than 35 different levels of consciousness. Further, ethnographic evidence indicates that perhaps as many as 90% of cultures on Earth experience many of these different levels of awareness on a routine basis. The technical term for this human experience is alternate states of consciousness, or ASC experiences. The resurrection appearances are just one example of altered state of consciousness that are reported throughout the Bible, many of which we have been covering in this Bible Alive playlist, Consciousness and the Bible. From the beginning to the end of the Bible, the texts are replete with ASC experiences. Genesis chapter 2, verse 21, and the creation of Adam, where a deep sleep is cast on the human being, is the first expression or example of an ASC experience. Isaiah 29, verse 10, Yahweh pours out deep sleep on the people, shutting the eyes, covering the heads. When David steals the water jug and spear from King Saul, all remained asleep because a deep slumber from Yahweh had fallen upon them. The book of Revelation is full of ASC experiences. Revelation chapter 1 verse 10, John of Patmos says that he was caught up in spirit. That could be translated as, I fell into trance. Revelation chapter 4 verse 2, at once I was caught up in spirit. Again, fell into trance is an adequate translation. Revelation 17 verse 3, then he carried me away in spirit, could be, brought me into trance to a deserted place. Revelation 21 verse 10, he took me in spirit, or he took me in trance to a great high mountain. Beginning with the heavy, divinely induced sleep in the first creature, Genesis 2 verse 21, and ending with the book of Revelation, which records the seer's trance experiences, it's pretty clear that altered states of consciousness are a select moment during which God reveals God's self and important information for human beings. Genesis chapter 15 verse 12, the sun is about to set and a deep sleep falls upon Abram. Dark dread descends upon him. Job chapter 4 verse 13 to 15. In my thoughts during visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on mortals, fear came upon me. Drawing upon her extensive cross-cultural research, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman identified 4 elements in an ecstatic trance experience. 1. The visionary is usually frightened by the experience. 2. He or she doesn't initially recognize the person who is appearing or what is being seen. 3. The person in the vision offers calming assurance followed by self-identification. Fear not, it is I. If it is an object that the visionary is seeing, the visionary will seek to identify the object. Is it a flying saucer? Is it a saint? Is it Bigfoot? Is it the face of Jesus? And so on. Finally, the visionary receives either some useful information, such as an answer to a problem, insight for a new direction in life, or a commissioning. In the resurrection appearances, the women are frightened by their experience. Mark chapter 16, verse 8, they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Matthew chapter 28, verse 7 through 8, the angel says to the women, do not be afraid. Luke chapter 24, verses 4 to 5, while they were puzzling over this, look, two men in dazzling garments appeared to them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. The person appearing in the vision offers calming assurance to dispel the fright. Do not be afraid. Matthew 28, verse 5 and 10. The angel says to the women, don't be afraid. Then Jesus says to them, do not be afraid. In Mark chapter 16, verse 6, the angelic young man says to them, do not be amazed. Luke chapter 24, verses 36 through 37. While they were still speaking about this, Jesus stood at their midst and said to them, peace be with you. But they were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. At first, those who see him often don't recognize the risen Jesus, someone they knew when he lived and walked among them. Mary Magdalene mistook him for a gardener in John chapter 20, verse 15. The disciples on the road to Emmaus thought that he was a stranger in Luke chapter 24, verses 15 through 16. Their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. The disciples in Jerusalem thought that they saw a ghost, Luke chapter 24, verse 37. But they were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. The disciples on the Sea of Galilee saw a stranger on the shore who gave them advice about where to cast their nets. John chapter 21, verse 4. When it was already dawn, Jesus was standing on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Sometimes the visionary does recognize the person appearing in the vision. Mark chapter 16, verse 5. On entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side. Matthew 28, verse 5. The angel said to the women in reply, do not be afraid. Luke 24, verse 4. Look, two men in dazzling garments appeared to them. John 20, verse 20. The disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. John 20, verse 28. Jesus came, though the doors were locked, and stood in their midst and said, peace be with you. John 21, verse 7. So the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. Finally, the experience offers new information. These three texts, Mark chapter 16, verse 6, Matthew 28, verse 6, and Luke chapter 24, verse 6, gives the new information that Jesus has been raised by God. Consider that the experience of the risen Jesus in the story of the two disciples on the way to Emmaus, Luke chapter 24, 13 to 35, reveals that all that the scriptures said must happen to Jesus. Jesus instructs his travel companions, opening their minds to understand the scriptures. Consider that this experience, recorded in John chapter 20, verse 17, reveals that Jesus is going to his Father. Sometimes these experiences offer instruction, like in Mark chapter 16, verse 7, and Matthew chapter 28, verses 7 through 10. These experiences instruct the visionaries to go and meet the risen Jesus in Galilee. In other instances of seeing the risen Jesus, the visionaries receive a commission. This experience in Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20, commissions the visionaries to go preach to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, dispersed among all the nations. The experience of Luke chapter 24, verse 48, commissions the visionaries as witnesses. The experience of John chapter 20, verses 21 through 23, commissions the visionaries to bring new members into the Johannine Jesus group. Characteristics, therefore, of vision experiences, identified by Dr. Felicitas Goodman as existing in all cultures, are quite evidently present in the New Testament accounts of those who saw the risen Jesus. First, they were frightened by the experience, startled and terrified. Secondly, initially they don't recognize Jesus. Third, Jesus or the angels in the visions offer calming assurance. Be not afraid. Finally, the visionary receives either some useful information or a commissioning. In considering Jesus' resurrection appearances, what does it mean to encounter the risen Christ? Two extremes are to be avoided. One extreme says that the disciples and Mary Magdalene and Paul saw Jesus as he actually was. This is a naive fundamentalist realism, and we must reject it. Any position that reduces the resurrection appearances into total objectivity is incorrect. Some people think of the resurrection appearances like witnessing any event from history, such as Caesar crossing the Rubicon or Washington crossing the Delaware. If you could, in a time machine, with photography technology and video camera and audio recording capability, you could record it. Is that the way it is with the risen Jesus and witnessing the risen Jesus? Could you photograph it like the way you could any ordinary event in history? For the last 200 years, Western society is plagued with a materialism, and our epistemology has been deeply impacted and shaped by it. We must likewise reject the other extreme, where the appearances are only a figment in the imagination, a psychogenic vision cooked up 100% from the brain. Something delusional or pathological, or a benign hallucination, or a mere literary device used to express something different than the actuality of the bodily appearances of the risen Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is risen in me, or something like that. Any position that reduces the appearances to only a subjective experience is incorrect. It's not what the authors are trying to convey. Relative to the resurrection appearances, cognitive neuroscience offers us helpful insight. Many scientists have performed electroencephalograms on people who signal when they have entered a different level of consciousness. For instance, neuroscientists have studied Franciscan religious women at prayer and a layperson practicing Tibetan meditation and analyzed the electroencephalographic tracings carefully. The subjects in such studies described their experiences with the scientists who correlated their report with the brain tracings. Among the many things they learned about the function of the brain in these experiences was that the colors seen characterized different levels of consciousness or awareness. These colors, of course, were products of the technology rather than elements of the brain experience. The anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman, however, has developed a similar insight and taught it at her institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Using similar technological experience from experiments in which she participated in Germany, Dr. Goodman interpreted the colors one might see in a trance. The sequence reflects neurological changes. To experience blinding white light is a sign of being in trance, in a different level of awareness. Orange color means that the trance is weakening. To experience naturalistic colors indicates a still weaker level of trance. To see actual figures with clarity means the trance has ended. The visionary has returned to waking consciousness, or pragmatic consciousness, so-called culturally normal consciousness. In other words, cultural consensus reality. In the Israelite tradition, light, blinding white light, is the manifestation of God's honor or glory, his very self. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 1, "Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of Yahweh has dawned upon you." Isaiah 62 verse 1. Israel or Jerusalem's vindication shines forth like the dawn, and her salvation like a burning torch. Luke chapter 2 verse 9, "The angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were struck with great fear." The light sometimes takes different forms, that of a cloud, or fire, or flashing brightly. The bright light from sky vault in Acts, even brighter than the sun, that Paul saw on the road to Damascus is typical of stage 1 of an ecstatic trance. Anthropologists identify 3 stages in a typical trance experience. Paul the Pharisee, who was familiar with light in the Israelite tradition, would be aware that he was entering a different level of awareness, a different stage of consciousness, or that some being from the realm of God might be initiating communication with him. His Israelite-informed brain would tell him, "Blinding white light? That's someone from the realm of God." In the resurrection reports, the young man clothed in a white robe is plausibly a being from the realm of God. In the document called Matthew, the angel of the Lord has an appearance like lightning, and his clothing was white as snow. Similarly, in the document called Luke, the 2 men in dazzling garments are angels. Constellations come down from sky vault, God's sky servants, as they are also explicitly identified in John. In the resurrection reports, Jesus is never associated with the color white. He is described in this way only in the Transfiguration. In the resurrection reports, Jesus is, however, frequently not recognized, and this matches also with alternate states of consciousness experiences. From a neurological perspective, the blinding white color signals that the visionaries are indeed in an alternate state of awareness. They are experiencing visitors from the realm of God and the spirits. Alternate reality. The fact that they often don't recognize the distinct face or figure of Jesus also indicates that this is an experience in an alternate state of awareness. Let's talk about the location of the appearances of the risen Lord. Where did the trance experiences of the risen Jesus take place? 6 occurred near the tomb in which Jesus was buried. 2 were experiences of Jesus himself. 4 were experiences of other beings. 8 appearances were away from the tomb. Regarding the appearances near the tomb, the study of Moroccan Jews forcibly repatriated to Israel in the 1950s is enlightening. In Morocco, these Jews used to venerate a holy man with an annual pilgrimage to his tomb. There they picnicked, prayed, and sought healing in a ritual reminiscent of the ancient Asclepian ritual. When they were moved to Israel, they transferred their devotional practices to the tomb of Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai at Mera near Zafat. Here, they experienced their holy man in a vision, as they did in Morocco, and obtained favors from him. The important discovery of this study is that many cultures expect to experience a holy man in some altered form of consciousness at his tomb. In Mark's Gospel, the very first title applied to Jesus is Holy One of God. Jesus was recognized as and lived and behaved according to all the criteria of a holy man, identified and described by anthropologists in their cross-cultural studies. The major gift of a holy man to his people is to broker healing from God to those who need it. The firm expectation about a holy man in Israelite culture is that he would be raised to life in the world to come. As for the experiences of the risen Jesus away from the tomb, Once again, psychiatric research contributes additional insight to anthropological information. Many cultures, including that of ancient Israel, view death as a process, rather than we do in the West, as a punctiliar event. Death certificates in the West record a specific time of death, down to the minute. Death is seen as a punctiliar event here. In contrast, death as a process usually entails the transition from this world into the next, a transition from one mode of existence, consensus reality, into another mode of existence, alternate reality. Sometimes a journey is involved. In nearly all instances, a metamorphosis is key. Like Paul says to the Corinthian Jesus group, "We shall not all fall asleep, but we shall all be changed." Viewing death as a process allows the survivors to continue to relate to a departed loved one for a significant time after the moment of expiration. Psychiatric research has documented that survivors of a beloved departed one continue to experience that person for many years, but most commonly within the first 10 years after the loss. Thus, the fact that Mary Magdalene is mentioned in all of the accounts of an alternate state of consciousness experience of Jesus and of other beings from the realm in which Jesus is now living with God suggests that her relationship to Jesus may have had stronger emotional roots than that of all the others, except perhaps the 11. Peter's speeches in Acts present a reliable summary of the experiences of Jesus' followers. In his lifetime, Jesus of Nazareth was commended by God with mighty deeds, wonders, and signs that God worked through him. Jesus was recognized as a holy man of God, a folk healer. It's important to understand the difference between healing and curing. Curing comes from a view which is biomedical. It seeks to eliminate disease, which is a biomedical malfunction. This is unknown to ancients. Ancients interpreted sickness events as illnesses, things that removed meaning from their lives, the lives of individuals and communities. Jesus restored meaning and wholeness to people's lives. Were there biomedical repairs? There's nothing against believing this. Something happened. There is a mysterious relationship between our minds and our bodies, but we don't have x-rays or blood tests or any scientific records of what Jesus did, and all those he healed eventually died. Even Jesus died. But Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. He restored meaningfulness to her life. He healed the poor. He healed. Some accepted Jesus, while others doubted and rejected him. Jesus' shameful death on the cross, a punishment reserved for criminals, caused his followers to wonder. They wondered whether or not they had been deceived, duped, fooled, shamed. If the God of Israel had truly been with Jesus and approved of Jesus, how could God have allowed this to happen? Cursed be anyone who hangs from a tree. But then, something marvelous happened. unexpected and extraordinary. Shortly after Jesus' death, his friends began to experience him transformed and alive in altered states of consciousness experiences. Since only the God of Israel can raise a person from the dead, they thought, then the God of Israel must have been pleased with Jesus. The God of Israel had rewarded Jesus with anastasis, resurrection, which the Israelite tradition recognized as the reward of the righteous. Acts tells us that God raised this Jesus. Of this we are all witnesses. Let the whole house of Israel know for certain. God has made him both Lord and Messiah. But why did non-believers, even the enemies of Jesus, not see him after his resurrection? Actually, a major skeptic and enemy of Jesus, Paul of Tarsus, did experience the risen Jesus. We'll get to Paul later on. In another speech from Acts, the Lucan Peter explains what anthropologists also know from their fieldwork. This man God raised on the third day, and granted that he be visible, not to all the people, but to us, the witnesses chosen by God in advance, who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. While human beings are neurologically hardwired for experiences of God and other beings in the realm of God, as we've been exploring in this playlist, as neuroscientists describe this pan-human capability, hardwired, it is not human beings who initiate the contact and communication with the realm of God or the spirit world, alternate reality. Rather, it is the spirits who determine if and when to interact with human beings. Journey with us now into the mind, the brain and nervous system of a girl, early 15th century France. Hardwired the same way as all human beings with a functioning brain and nervous system, she is capable of over 35 different states of awareness. God has hardwired her for revelations, visions, experiences that can transform her and the world. This will help us better understand what is going on in the post-resurrection accounts, in the Gospels and in Acts, and other New Testament literature. Such experiences as ASCs can transform persons and communities, can change the course of history, can even change the world. They're messy. Sometimes the interpretation brings about a violent change. Joan of Arc, like all of us, was capable of experiencing God holy and absolute mystery, in over 35 different states of consciousness. But Joan of Arc was not capable of initiating such communications and revelations. That came on the part of the realm of God. I'd like you to remember the psychiatrist who observed that he treats people who hear voices and sees things that aren't there. He's representative of a lot of other brilliant scientists who fall prey to a kind of materialist bias. One difference between the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, a basic resource book, Volume 3, and the DSM Volume 4, is that many religious experiences and mystical experiences that were labeled as pathological in the former edition were omitted and recognized as normal in the later one. Good science can help us understand and appreciate the marvelous gifts to human beings from the Creator God, so long as the creature doesn't reject or spurn them. As St. Paul wisely told his Corinthian Jesus group, and spiritually he speaks to us, "If Christ has not been raised, your faith is in vain."